Hello and welcome to I Heard It on a Podcast, our little corner of the Wild West. My name is Riley.
And my name is Isaiah. And Riley, do you like saving energy?
Yes?
Do you like changing time and doing complicated things that date back to the 1700s?
Only occasionally.
Well, that's what we're doing today. Well, we're not
We are going
doing
to do
it
those
today.
things?
Maybe this will be a convincing enough podcast that the world leaders will listen to our rationale and our reasoning and change time. Which kind of makes us time travelers.
Debatable. Will I save money during this episode?
I mean, you're not going to be like doing things that cost you money.
Except for like running electricity and, existing. I don't know.
Yeah, and if you think about it that way, we're using a lot more light than normal, so it's probably costing you more money to do this episode. But that's not the point.
Cut all the lights. We're doing it dark.
No, today we're talking about daylight savings and the pros and cons and our personal opinions, probably mostly our personal opinions on daylight savings time. But basically, if you don't know, which...
If you're outside of America, you might not know.
Yeah, some places, they don't really observe it in equatorial countries
Makes
as much.
sense.
Daylight savings is when, in the springtime, the hourly clock is moved forward an hour to allow for more daylight in the winter time evening, which is confusing.
I've never really known which one was the normal time. If it was the winter or the summer that was normal, and then daylight savings time is the one that's switched or moved, but I don't know which is which.
I want to say the summer is normal time. We'll find out in the
Yeah, I'm not sure.
The data, but basically the clock is changed to allow for more time in one of those seasons to have time that's light in the evening. And some of the reasons for that are to make agrarian society type things more productive, because you have more like working hours in the day, kind of, which isn't really true, but and also to give people more time, like where it's light, for commuting. In the Industrial Revolution, it was big because people would have time to like get to work and back when it was light.
That makes sense, because their streetlights were gas powered and they had to like physically turn them on every one of them.
Right. Which, I mean, they still had to do. So I think what it's going to come down to a lot for me is like all of the reasons kind of make sense, but I don't think they're necessary now. I don't know that they ever were necessarily, but
okay,
I don't think they are now. So a little bit more history and some fun tidbits about daylight savings time.
I love both those things.
It's summertime, by the way. So that's also one of the names
one that's
of it.
Changed.
Yeah. So it's known as daylight savings time, daylight time, or summertime.
So they move everything forward an hour.
When
daylight savings time is active.
Yes.
And then when they move it back, that's just going back to what it normally is and should be.
Yes.
So the argument to get rid of daylight savings time would basically mean the sun would rise 1 hour earlier and set 1 hour sooner in the summer?
No. So the argument generally that's being passed around right now, and we can talk about this more later, but the argument now is to keep daylight savings time permanently active.
Oh.
So it would jump forward and then never set back, which would give us more light in the
evenings of the winters.
Yes.
And the sun would rise an hour later in the winters. Okay. Sorry, I derailed your history section.
No, it's okay. It's kind of confusing to think about because there's so much like jumping back and forth and trying to figure out what time does. And it's just, time is confusing and we made it ourselves. So like it's our own fault. But daylight savings time, the first kind of like recorded mention of daylight savings time, when someone like conceptualized daylight savings time, was actually done by Benjamin Franklin, believe it or not.
I think I maybe have heard that before.
Yeah, which is weird to me because like, I don't know. It turns out it was like a satirical thing. So he wrote an article, like a satire article.
He was kind of sassy.
Yeah. So he wrote a paper, an article in a paper that was like satire about like how we should like move time so that there's more time to work because it's light more often. And some people like kind of took that and ran with it and thought about it. And they thought about it for a long time. It looks like it was kind of a thing that was suggested again in 1895 and then in 1907. They just kind of like have consistently talked about it, and every time they've talked about it, they've kind of been like, well, no, it's not worth it. We're not going to implement it right
It's
now.
not worth the trouble.
Right. So in 1908, that was the first time that they actually implemented it.
Really?
In Port Arthur, Canada.
I would have thought it would have been like before the Civil War, like
No.
1800s.
No, apparently not. So they did it in Port Arthur, Canada in 1908, and then, excuse me, in 1916, the German Empire and Austria-Hungary both started doing daylight savings time in their countries.
Okay.
And then some countries have used it on and off throughout the years, like in the energy crisis in the 70s. Some countries like temporarily enacted it to save power because there would be less like lighting at night because people would be sleeping when it's dark and not staying up and doing things when it's dark because of time. It gets really confusing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because they more of their like waking hours are when the sun is up.
Right. Because they shift, daylight savings time shifts our societal structured routines based around the clock to fit the daylight hours sometimes.
We can get into our personal opinions about it later, but there's lots of sunlight on both ends in the summer.
Yeah,
at least here.
Summer's not really the problem. It's
winter.
That's the problem.
Okay.
And like, to me, it's, especially in our society today, it's like you can't take something from here and have it for free. Like if you're going to put something here, you're going to take it from this end. And you kind of, there's no such thing as getting an extra hour of productive time. And I would argue that we don't need it nowadays anyway. Like we kind of live in a 24/7 society where like people are working at night. People like have to do things at night. Like the whole world doesn't just shut down at 8 p.m. Like people do stuff at night. And a lot of our society has kind of migrated to having evenings be like a time where there like extra productivity happens. Like if you're doing homework or if you're like doing a second job or if you're just like hanging out, like cooking or like going to the gym. And our evenings have kind of expanded from what they used to be like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, to kind of be a larger part of the day, honestly. Like I would say we probably sleep in a lot more, but a lot less in general now than we used to.
Sleeping in?
We sleep in more on average, like as a society. We probably sleep later in the day, but I also think we probably on average sleep less as a society
less hours
in general.
Total?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
The average kind of like bedtime in the United States from like what I could find was kind of around like 10 p.m. if you average like everyone.
Okay.
Which is a lot later than when it gets dark, especially in the winter. That's 6 hours.
Is that averaging
past.
Like babies and
I
stuff
doubt
like
it
that?
averages babies. I'm sure that was just adults.
Because when you're throwing in like 6 o'clock bedtimes in there, that really is an outlier.
It probably averages. It probably wasn't a big study, but
Right.
It probably
Well,
averages elderly people too who tend to go to bed earlier.
Yeah, I suppose. If you include babies and elderly people, those low ends are averaged out by people like you.
Who stays up till like 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weirdo.
I love the night, but I don't like when it gets dark too early, which is why I like daylight savings, but I don't like it happening. If that makes sense. So
Okay.
I like when daylight savings is on, if you will. Like in the summer when daylight savings time is happening and it's light a lot later into the evening. I like that. And
Okay.
I don't get affected as much by it being light later in the morning. So it gets light maybe in the summer, like 6:45 instead of 5:45 or 6:30.
In the summer?
Yeah,
You talking about when it switches?
when it's on. So
In like the middle of summer, like end of June, the sun rises at 5 or like earlier than 5. I think, at least where we are, like it the sun rises real early, even when daylight savings is on towards the middle of the summer, because it's definitely before 5:45. But I don't think that there's a good solution, honestly.
no.
You know what? I'm gonna save my actual good solution to the end.
Okay.
But I think we don't. You're right. We don't necessarily need more daylight time because we've replaced daylight with these lights
Yeah,
and electricity, and you can go do your workout at 10 p.m. or cook a nice meal
right,
because of electricity.
right,
So that kind of takes away from, and even agricultural work can be done at night now.
right.
The like I would argue the main reason why we would maybe want to um, customize when our daylight time is would be for working outside. But most jobs where you work outside in the dark anyway, like construction or nighttime farming during harvest time or whatever, you can add light anyway.
And the reality is, like, the energy saving rationale made a lot more sense even up until like 20 years ago, because people used, like you were saying, back in the day, they used like gas light poles, or they used, halogen or incandescent light bulbs, or, tungsten lamps, and like all of these very inefficient.
Hold on. Did you say halogen?
Yeah.
Is that how it's pronounced?
It could be halogen or halogen.
I've literally never heard it pronounced any other way except for halogen.
It can be both.
Wow.
So there you go.
Okay, keep going.
Anyway, really inefficient forms of like lighting. And now we have like, LED, and we have other forms that are very efficient. And so the energy savings by like turning off the lights an hour earlier than you would is like not that much comparatively. And like you said, we do have ways to light everything at night when you need to work. And like the reality of our society is stuff happens at night. So I think it's not as useful of a thing now. I think it's probably hanging on just because it's like convention and we're used to it. But like, to me, like, I don't feel a lot of practical uses for it. And this gets even more complicated by the fact that like not everywhere uses daylight savings time.
Right.
Not everywhere in the world uses it. Not even everywhere in the United States uses it. And the issue now is like a lot of states are talking about like either fully turning it on all the time and being daylight savings time as standard, or permanently being on standard time and leaving it off. And no one
That'd
can
be
really
worse.
decide which way to go. And some states want to do some things, and other states want to do some things, and some states might just switch back and forth. And so if that happens, like, we're going to have 40 states that change, and then we're going to have 15 states that are always an hour off, and then we're going to have 15 states that are an hour off the other way, and the time zones aren't going to matter anymore, and it's just going to be chaos.
So what you're saying is the federal government needs to seize this power from states and make an executive decision that they
Yes.
can't combat.
Yes.
Hmm.
Which
Interesting.
there have been some ballot measures that have like been presented. I don't know if anything's like gotten very far. There was one that was like a Colorado specific one recently, I think, and I think it ended up dying in wherever it got stuck, basically. But
There was one in Colorado that was like, we will send this bill to Congress to have it enacted federally, but we're not going to do that until at least, I think it was 25 states sign on to this.
right,
So it was like Colorado has already agreed. They're like, yes, we'll do this. And a handful of other states have too, but they won't even present the bill to the federal government until at least half of states have said, we're already cool with this. So your battle is only with these other states that haven't
yeah,
already agreed to it. But I think that makes sense to say, like, we want to do this, but we recognize that it's not even worth trying if it's only one state.
right. And that's how, like, I mean, there's precedence for that, because that's how time zones came about, right? And like there was this big thing where everyone was setting their clocks by the sun. And so people would be like, oh, well, the sun comes up at 6 a.m. But obviously the sun comes up at different times across the country. And so 6 a.m., in Denver might be, 15 minutes off what 6 a.m. in like North Platte, Nebraska is, and so everyone's 6 a.m. was kind of different. And that worked fine for most of when we invented time, until we invented like transportation, kind of, like it worked fine until we had the ability to like move great distances very quickly. And so when like railroads were becoming a big thing, people would miss trains, and railroads didn't know like what time to say for which place, and it was just very hard to keep track of for everyone. And so that's kind of what spurred inventing time zones and kind of setting like, okay, well, like this part of the country is all happening at this time, and this part of the country is all happening at this time. and you're not going to get to be like 6 minutes off because you want to, and so that took some time, and there's a lot of pushback on that actually, and a lot of places were like, oh well, I don't want to like set my time to England because that's where it was like GMT, it was like the date line. And so some people were like, we want to set it to our country, and we don't want to be 6 minutes ahead, we don't want to change anything. And so it took a long time for this to become standardized, but it works so much better that way. And I think the same could be said about daylight savings time, where like there's arguments on both sides and everyone kind of wants to do it their own way, but it's like we need to have something that's standard. And I honestly think like switching back and forth is just more hassle now than the benefit that we get out of it.
I'm on board for turning it permanently on. I think it would be a harder sell for me to turn it permanently off.
Mm-hmm.
But the main downside to it being turned permanently on is the sun would rise an hour even later in the winter, right?
Because turning it on, so if we're saying turning it on is like
moving everything forward.
So that would mean 5 a.m. becomes 6 a.m.
Right. So then in December, when the days are the shortest anyway, and the sun doesn't rise till 7:15, the sun wouldn't rise till 8:15. That would be really weird.
But it would be light later because 4 p.m. would become 5 p.m.
Yeah.
It's probably a personal thing, and this is probably why so many people have different like ideas of what we should do, but like I would prefer it to get light later and stay light later. Like I would rather go to work in the dark and come out of work and have it be light than go to work when it's light and come out when it's dark.
I disagree with that.
So, that's the problem.
For me, like, yeah, coming out of work and it being dark is a bummer. And recently the days have been starting to get a little bit longer. And when I leave work at like 5, there's a little bit of sunlight left and it feels really good to walk outside. But as much as I love that feeling, it is 10 times worse to have to get ready, like wake up before the sun is even up and get ready and like drive to work before the sun is up. That is somehow much worse to me than the feeling of walking out of work and it already being dark.
I'm the type of person that like can't like do anything like personal almost, or do anything like fun or enjoyable before work happens. And so like times when I would like do more like shift work or like odd schedules, 5 years ago or whatever, where I would go into work at 10 or 11 a.m. like that whole morning section is basically wasted because I have to go to work later. I know I'd like have a limited amount of time. I don't want to like get sucked into something or like start a project that I know is going to take longer than that. And so I usually end up just kind of like putzing those hours away. And so that's probably a part of it too. And the reason that I don't mind if it's dark is because I'm just getting up and going straight to work. And to me, it's like, okay, well, this time would have been wasted anyway. It doesn't matter if it's dark because like I wouldn't be out doing anything anyway. So that's probably a part of the reasoning, like the mental logic behind it. But I do get what you're saying, and it probably is a lot just personal preference.
I think for me, it's because at the beginning of your day, you have so much more to do and you're not like looking forward to having to get up and pick out an outfit and pack your lunch and drive to work. But at the end of the day, all that stuff is already done. So if you can you don't need the like extra boost of sunshine to tell you that the best part of the day is ahead of you. I kind of lost what I was saying.
Okay, but what about this? Like, if you don't have that boost, say it gets dark as soon as you're out of work and you get home and like there's nothing like super pressing to do, and you like make dinner and you eat and it's dark and it's like sleepy, and like that's just automatically invitation to just like sit on the couch and not do anything for the rest of the evening.
Exactly.
But like, what if you need to do things, or if you like want to do things? Like, I feel like you're so much more likely to like go on a walk or like go get dinner with a friend or like do a hobby if it's light outside in the evening, where like none of those things I would probably do in the morning before work because I don't get up at 4 a.m.,
Okay, this brings me to my master solution.
Okay.
Because the real problem that we're talking about here is there's not enough sunshine in the winter, period. Because all of our sunshine hours are being taken up by working. And in my particular case, there's not even a window in the room I work in. So
so you can't tell.
I go to work, it's kind of light, like the sun has risen, but it's like barely over. And then I sit inside all day. Maybe I like walk a little bit during lunch or whatever. And then 5 more hours pass and I walk outside and it's dark, and I didn't even know that it was dark. So here's my solution. Here's my proposition. There's two different options. One is a little more progressive than the other. Solution number one, we keep the same like 2,080 hours of working a year, which is like a 40-hour work week. But over the summer, we work longer days. And over the winter, we work shorter days. And so as the daylight gets longer, you work more.
Okay.
And then in the winter, you only work like a 5-hour day during the, last week of December when it's super dark all the time. Proposition number two, we keep the same amount of work that we have, which is about 8 hours a day on average, probably, in the summer and early fall and late spring. But as the days start to get shorter, we just work less.
Okay.
There's lots of jobs. I think the average American work week is like 32-ish hours a week.
Okay.
So we're making progress towards us not having to spend almost all of every day working. So this could be a good way to start transitioning people a little bit towards not being a slave to the 40-hour work week. You get to do it for half of the year, maybe 3/4 of the year, but in the most dark part of the year, you only work 6 hours a day.
Okay. I like those ideas.
Yeah.
I think like I'll address the second idea first, and I'll come back to the first one. But I think like ideally, in my mind, you would only work as long as you're productive, which studies have shown on average most white collar workers are probably productive for about 3 hours a day. And the rest of the time is looking busy.
That's
or
probably accurate.
Going to the bathroom or getting coffee or spacing out.
Doing a task slower than you actually need
Right.
to.
And so I think that we should not incentivize just like butts in seats as being the metric of success and productivity, but like output more. So if I like had permission to get my work done, just hypothetically, not necessarily the job I'm at now, but hypothetically, if I could get my work done in 5 hours a week and it didn't matter when I did it, and I could just like knock it out, and I didn't have to like worry about looking busy afterwards or sitting around or like filling my time.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a much more incentivizing thing for workers to like do good work quickly. And obviously there's caveats, like if you need to be available to people, or if you need to, if you're like an EMT, like you can't just like leave because you're not, whatever. But
or if you have like a customer service role,
right,
like your job is when other people want you to do your job.
Right. But more on the individual contributor productivity output focused jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one idea. I think that's even more progressive than what you had suggested.
Yeah.
But it also probably applies to a smaller subset. My thought on your first idea is, what if you flipped it? And so instead of like long days in the summer, short days in the winter, what if you take the time that's already going to be miserable and you're sitting in a dark room anyway, and you work like 12-hour days in the winter when you wouldn't see the sun at all anyway. And then in the summer, you get to only work like 2 or 3 hours a day and spend the whole rest of your time like enjoying the sunlight.
That would be pretty radical. I do think it would negatively affect my mental health to literally go weeks at a time without seeing the sun. I guess there's weekends, but still going 96 hours without seeing daylight would start to negatively affect me.
Well, how much daylight do you think you see? Like, say, like middle of December when it's like shortest days possible. How much daylight do you see on a work day?
For me personally, there's like some sunlight coming in while I'm finishing getting ready to go to work, like making my lunch or whatever. And then it's a 15-minute drive to work. And then I usually like purposefully try to be at least seeing the sun during my lunch break, whether that's like inside by some windows or whatever. So like an hour and a half, I guess, on a decent middle of December work day.
Which I would argue you could still get if you were working longer hours. You could still, you could go out on an hour-long lunch and see the sun for that time, and you could get up to walk around or go outside. That doesn't necessarily have to stop, but you might just work, instead of till 5, maybe you work until 8 or something to that degree. But like, I would much rather have the time in the summer when I can like do exciting things that like I look back on like a year later and be like, oh, that was like really fun, and not have the time when I'm just going to be sitting on the couch watching TV and not remember what I did a week later, you know? So I think that time in the daylight is more valuable in general. I think we're both agreeing on that. And so to me personally, I would rather have that valuable time for myself and have the less valuable dark time to work. But I don't know, they make those like seasonal depression lamps. Just get one of those.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, this was my idea in the first place, but that the best solution is like work reform.
Yeah.
Or like employment reform. And obviously that's not a solution for everyone like we've talked about, but generally I think we're moving towards not needing to. We can attain the same level of productivity in this country or more productivity even with less human work hours.
Yep.
So if that can coincide with like more freedom, more mental happiness because you get to see the sun more,
Yep.
more flexibility, I think that's a win-win-win.
So really, daylight savings time doesn't matter, and we need to work less.
I would push much harder for like employment reform towards the average work week being like 32 to 35 hours a week. I would push for that much harder than turning daylight savings on permanently. I think the first option would make a much bigger change in my life.
Yeah, I agree. And the downside of that is you're going toe-to-toe with capitalism, which is...
Yeah, but it's not unprecedented. Like 100 years ago, people worked 70 hours a week, not because they were high-powered executives, but because we just needed that much like materials, and it was so hard to make stuff, so much harder compared to now to make stuff. So we're just going to continue. That gets into a whole other conversation.
UBI is coming.
Yeah, eventually. That's my thoughts on daylight savings time.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think if it changes, I'll be happy. But until then, we'll just kind of keep suffering through weird time changes and it being dark when it shouldn't be. So
suffer until change. Thank you for listening to I Heard It on a Podcast. We've got new episodes every Monday, wherever you find podcasts, including YouTube.
Yeah. And if you'd like to connect with us, we're on Instagram and Threads. And you can also email us if you want to chat with us at hello@ihearditonapodcast.com.